Commander Zethkar stared at the tactical display with growing desperation. The red dots representing enemy ships outnumbered his fleet by 10 to 1. His people, the proud Vorthak Empire, had ruled this sector of space for over 3 centuries. Now, in the span of mere days, everything was falling apart. The Kethmori swarm had come from the void between galaxies, their black ships consuming everything in their path. They didn't negotiate. They didn't take prisoners. They simply devoured entire worlds, leaving nothing but dead rock floating in space. "Sir, we've lost contact with the 4th Fleet," reported his communications officer, her voice trembling despite her military training. "The Kethmori broke through their lines 30 minutes ago." Zethkar's mandibles clicked in frustration. The 4th Fleet had been their strongest defensive formation, 47 ships of the line including 2 dreadnoughts. If they were gone, nothing stood between the swarm and the Vorthak homeworlds. "How long until they reach Vorth Prime?" he asked, though he already knew the answer would be terrible. "At current velocity, 18 hours, sir." 18 hours. In less than a day, his civilization would be extinct. 3 billion souls would join the countless others that the Kethmori had already consumed. His 4 children, his mate, everyone he had ever known would become food for creatures that seemed to exist only to destroy. "Sir," called out Lieutenant Yextal from the sensor station. "I'm detecting something unusual. The Kethmori advance has slowed in Sector 7. Zethkar turned to the main display. Sure enough, a portion of the enemy formation had stopped moving toward Vorthak space. Instead, they seemed to be gathering around something. "What are they doing?" "Unknown, sir. But, whatever it is, it's bought us some time. Maybe 6 additional hours. 6 hours. Still not enough to evacuate even a fraction of their population." Zethkar had commanded fleets for 40 years, fought in 7 major conflicts, and earned the Silver Star of Valor twice. But he had never faced anything like this. The Kethmori were beyond conventional warfare. They were a force of nature, like a black hole or supernova. "Sir, incoming transmission from Admiral Kethvin on the 2nd Fleet." A holographic image of Admiral Kethvin appeared above the command table. The old warrior looked as tired as Zethkar felt. "Commander, I'm afraid I have more bad news. The 3rd Fleet attempted a flanking maneuver 3 hours ago. They managed to destroy 12 enemy vessels before being overwhelmed." "How many did we lose?" "All of them. 31 ships." Zethkar felt his heart sink. They had traded 31 ships for 12 enemy vessels. At that rate, they would run out of ships long before making a meaningful dent in the swarm. "Admiral, we need to consider the unthinkable," Zethkar said quietly. "Perhaps it's time to activate the Omega Protocol." The Omega Protocol was their last resort, a planet-cracking weapon that could destroy entire worlds. If they couldn't save their people, at least they could deny the Kethmori the satisfaction of consuming them. "I've already spoken with the High Command," Admiral Kethvin replied. "They've refused to authorize it. They believe there must be another way." "Another way?" Zethkar almost laughed at the absurdity. What other way could there be? They had tried everything: direct assault, guerrilla tactics, even attempting to negotiate. The Kethmori simply ignored all communication attempts and continued their advance. "Commander," Lieutenant Yextal called out urgently. "You need to see this. I'm picking up massive energy signatures from the edge of the system." Zethkar looked at the display and froze. Ships were appearing out of hyperspace, but these weren't Kethmori vessels. They looked different, sleeker, more advanced than anything in the Vorthak database. "How many?" he asked. "I count. This can't be right." "How many, Lieutenant?" 57 ships, sir. "And they're still coming." 63. 71. "Sir, I'm reading 84 vessels now, and the signatures are unlike anything I've ever seen." Zethkar studied the tactical display. The newcomers had arranged themselves in a perfect battle formation between the Kethmori swarm and Vorthak space. Whoever they were, they clearly intended to fight. "Are they responding to our distress signal?" asked the communications officer. 3 days ago, in desperation, the Vorthak High Command had broadcast an emergency transmission on all frequencies. It was a call for help sent out into the void, hoping that some advanced civilization might hear their plea. They had detailed the Kethmori threat and begged for assistance, offering everything they possessed in return for aid. Most of the command staff had considered it a futile gesture. The nearest known civilization was 200 light-years away, and they were barely more advanced than the Vorthak themselves. But, now, mysterious ships were arriving just as their world faced extinction. Incoming transmission, the communications officer announced. It's from the unknown fleet. Put it through. The holographic projector activated, but, instead of the alien form Zethkar expected, a human face appeared. The being looked remarkably similar to the Vorthak, though smaller and, without mandibles. Most shocking was that it spoke perfect Vorthak. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force. We received your distress call and have come to assist. Please maintain your current position while we engage the hostile forces. Zethkar stared at the projection. Admiral Chen, I am Commander Zethkar of the Vorthak Imperial Fleet. While we appreciate your arrival, you should know that the enemy force consists of over 800 vessels. Your 84 ships, while impressive, may not be sufficient. The human smiled, an expression that somehow conveyed both confidence and grim determination. Commander, you're looking at our first response fleet. Our primary battle groups are still en route. Before Zethkar could ask what that meant, Lieutenant Yextal gasped. Sir, massive hyperspace signatures. Something huge is coming through. The space around the human fleet began to shimmer and distort. What emerged from hyperspace defied belief. Ships the size of small moons appeared one after another. Massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed even the largest Vorthak vessels materialized in perfect formation. Sweet ancestors, whispered Admiral Kethvin over the comm channel. How many ships do these humans have? The answer came as more and more vessels continued to emerge. Battleships, carriers, destroyers, cruisers, an endless stream of warships filled the space between the Kethmori and Vorthak territory. The human fleet grew from hundreds to thousands of ships within minutes. Admiral Chen's voice came through the comm again. Commander Zethkar, we're going to need detailed information about the enemy's capabilities and tactics. Our scientists have been analyzing the data in your distress signal, but first-hand combat experience would be invaluable. Of course, Zethkar managed to reply, still stunned by the sheer scale of the human response. But, Admiral, you should know that the Kethmori are unlike any enemy we've ever faced. They don't just destroy, they consume. Their ships seem to be organic, capable of self-repair and adaptation. Our weapons have limited effectiveness. Understood. We've encountered similar entities before, though not on this scale. Our xenobiology teams have developed some interesting countermeasures. Before Zethkar could ask what kind of entities the humans had faced, the tactical display lit up with activity. The Kethmori swarm had detected the human fleet and was changing course to engage. 800 alien ships turned as one and began accelerating toward the human formation. All Vorthak vessels, withdraw to minimum safe distance, Admiral Chen commanded. We'll handle this. Zethkar wanted to protest. His pride demanded that the Vorthak fleet fight alongside these unexpected allies. But, looking at his 15 remaining ships compared to the human armada, he realized they would only get in the way. All ships, withdraw to observation range, he ordered reluctantly. As the Vorthak fleet pulled back, Zethkar watched the human formations adjust their positioning. Unlike the rigid battle lines favored by most civilizations, the humans deployed in a complex three-dimensional pattern that seemed to flow and shift like a living thing. Fascinating, murmured Admiral Kethvin. Look at their formation structure. It's not based on any traditional tactical doctrine. Enemy contact in 60 seconds, announced Lieutenant Yextal. The Kethmori ships were closing fast, their organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. Zethkar had seen that light show before. It usually preceded the release of acid clouds that could eat through ship hulls like paper. Human fleet is opening fire, the sensor officer reported. The space between the two fleets erupted in brilliant flashes of light. But, these weren't the plasma beams or particle cannons that the Vorthak were familiar with. The human weapons created strange distortions in space itself, twisting reality around the target vessels. What kind of weapons are those? Zethkar asked in amazement. His question was answered as the first human salvo struck the Kethmori formation. The organic ships that had shrugged off every weapon the Vorthak possessed began to disintegrate at the molecular level. Entire vessels simply fell apart as the bonds holding their matter together were severed. But, the Kethmori weren't defenseless. They returned fire with bioplasma charges that could melt through most known materials. To Zethkar's surprise, the human ships absorbed the attacks without visible damage. Their shields are holding, Lieutenant Yextal reported with disbelief. The Kethmori weapons aren't penetrating at all. Admiral Chen's voice came over the comm channel again, calm despite the massive battle raging around her fleet. Commander Zethkar, our initial analysis suggests these creatures are from the Andromeda galaxy. Our xenobiology database indicates they're silicon-carbon hybrid organisms with a distributed consciousness. Is this consistent with your observations? Zethkar blinked in surprise. The humans had determined more about the Kethmori in minutes than the Vortak had learned in days of fighting. Yes, Admiral. Our scientists reached similar conclusions, though we never determined their origin point. We fought their cousins before, a species called the Devourers in the Magellan Cloud. Same basic biology, same consumption patterns. The key is disrupting their quantum coherence field. As if to demonstrate, a group of human destroyers launched a coordinated attack on a cluster of Kethmori vessels. Instead of explosive weapons, they fired some kind of energy pulse that caused the organic ships to convulse and split apart. Incredible, breathed Admiral Kethvin. They're using quantum disruptors. We theorized about such weapons but never developed the technology. The battle was unlike anything Zethkar had ever witnessed. The humans fought with a level of coordination and technological sophistication that seemed almost supernatural. Their ships moved in perfect harmony, each vessel playing its part in a complex tactical symphony. But what truly amazed him was their adaptability. When the Kethmori released their acid clouds, the human ships immediately reconfigured their shield frequencies. When the organic vessels tried to ram the human formation, point defense systems that Zethkar hadn't even known were activated to vaporize the attackers. How long have these humans been fighting wars, he wondered aloud. As if she had heard him, Admiral Chen's voice came through the comm commander. Our species has been at war for most of our recorded history. We've learned to be very good at it. The human fleet began to advance, pushing deeper into the Kethmori formation. What had started as a defensive action was becoming a complete rout. The organic ships that had seemed unstoppable were being systematically destroyed by weapons and tactics they had no answer for. Sir, Lieutenant Yextal called out excitedly. The Kethmori are breaking formation. They're retreating. Zethkar could hardly believe it. The unstoppable swarm that had consumed entire civilizations was running away. The humans had not only stopped them but were actively driving them back. Admiral Chen, he called out. Should we pursue them? Negative, Commander. We have contingency fleets positioned along their likely escape routes. Any survivors will be intercepted before they can reach populated systems. Contingency fleets. The humans had planned for every possibility, including the need to prevent any Kethmori from escaping to threaten other worlds. The level of strategic thinking involved was staggering. As the last of the organic ships disappeared into hyperspace, Zethkar realized that his people's salvation had come from a species they had never heard of. Humans had crossed vast distances to answer a desperate plea for help, bringing with them the most powerful fleet he had ever seen. Admiral Chen, he said formally. On behalf of the Vortak Empire and the 3 billion souls you have saved today, I offer our eternal gratitude. How can we ever repay this debt? The human woman smiled again, and this time Zethkar could see warmth behind her professional demeanor. No debt is owed, Commander. When someone calls for help, you answer. That's what decent people do. As the human fleet began to organize itself for the journey home, Zethkar wondered what kind of civilization could produce such warriors. More importantly, he wondered if the galaxy was ready for humanity's arrival on the interstellar stage. 3 weeks after the battle that saved the Vortak Empire, Commander Zethkar found himself aboard the human flagship Indomitable, a vessel so massive it could have housed his entire remaining fleet in its cargo bays. He had come to formally thank Admiral Chen and discuss the implications of humanity's intervention. The corridors of the human ship were unlike anything in Vortak design. Where his people favored grand, ceremonial spaces that demonstrated power and authority, the humans had created functional, efficient pathways that somehow still managed to feel welcoming. The walls were lined with images from what he assumed was Earth: blue oceans, green forests, and structures that seemed to blend technology with natural beauty. Commander Zethkar, Admiral Chen greeted him in her ready room. Welcome aboard. I hope the accommodations are comfortable. More than adequate, Admiral. Though I must admit, your ship's design philosophy is quite different from ours. Chen smiled as she poured 2 cups of what she called coffee, a stimulant beverage that had become surprisingly popular among his crew during their brief stay. We learned long ago that people fight better when they have something worth fighting for. Sterile military vessels tend to make soldiers forget what they're protecting. Zethkar accepted the cup and took a tentative sip. The bitter liquid had grown on him over the past few days. Admiral, I've been authorized by the High Command to discuss formal relations between our peoples. The Vorthak Empire wishes to establish an alliance with humanity. I appreciate the offer, Commander, but I should be honest with you. We didn't come here seeking political advantages or territorial gains. We came because you asked for help. But surely humanity must have strategic interests in this region of space? Admiral Chen walked to the viewing port that dominated one wall of her ready room. Beyond the transparent aluminum, Zethkar could see dozens of human ships conducting what they called humanitarian operations, delivering medical supplies, food, and technical assistance to the worlds that had been damaged by the Kethmori advance. 300 years ago, Chen began, humanity nearly destroyed itself in what we call the resource wars. We fought over water, minerals, energy, all the things we thought were scarce. It took us almost wiping out our own species to realize that the universe is abundant beyond imagination. The only real scarcity is compassion. Zethkar found this philosophy fascinating and somewhat alien. In his experience, advanced civilizations expanded because they needed resources or territory. The idea of a spacefaring species that had overcome such basic drives was revolutionary. So humanity seeks nothing from us? We seek friendship, if you're willing to offer it. Knowledge exchange, cultural sharing, perhaps cooperative exploration of unknown regions. But we won't ask you to subordinate your sovereignty or share your strategic resources. A chime sounded, and Chen's communications officer appeared on the wall screen. Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Council. Put them through. The image changed to show a familiar figure, Counselor Vexmore of the Eltarian Republic, one of the most powerful voices in the galactic community. His reptilian features were arranged in what Zethkar recognized as barely controlled anger. Admiral Chen, I am Counselor Vexmore, speaking for the Galactic Council. We demand an immediate explanation for humanity's unauthorized military intervention in this sector. Admiral Chen's expression didn't change, but Zethkar noticed a subtle shift in her posture. The relaxed stance of a moment before had been replaced by the bearing of a warrior ready for battle. Counselor, Chen replied calmly, we responded to a distress call from the Vorthak Empire. They were facing extinction from an extragalactic threat. The Vorthak Empire is not a member of the Galactic Council. Their internal conflicts are not our concern, and certainly not yours. Your species has no authority to deploy military forces in this region. Zethkar felt his mandibles click in indignation. Internal conflict? The Kethmori swarm had been a threat to every living thing in the galaxy, not just the Vorthak. But, before he could speak, Admiral Chen raised a hand to silence him. Counselor, with respect, genocide is never an internal matter. When a species faces extinction, any decent civilization has not just the right but the obligation to help. Decent civilization? Vexmore's eyes narrowed. Admiral, humanity has existed in space for barely 2 centuries. You lack the wisdom and experience to make such determinations. The Galactic Council has maintained peace for over 3,000 years through careful non-interference policies. Peace for whom? Chen asked quietly. Not for the 17 species that have gone extinct in Council space over the past century. Not for the millions of beings who died when the Zephyr Plague swept through the Outer Rim worlds while the Council debated response protocols. Zethkar was surprised by the detailed knowledge Admiral Chen displayed of galactic history. Humanity had clearly been studying their neighbors long before making contact. Counselor Vexmore's expression grew even more hostile. Admiral, you will withdraw your forces from Vorthak space immediately and report to Council Station for a hearing on your violations of interstellar law. I'm afraid that's not going to happen, Counselor. The silence that followed was profound. Zethkar had never heard anyone refuse a direct order from the Galactic Council. The political implications were staggering. Admiral, Vexmore said slowly, perhaps you don't understand the gravity of this situation. The Galactic Council represents 47 star systems and controls the largest military force in known space. We have the power to enforce our decisions. Chen smiled, but this time the expression held no warmth at all. Counselor, perhaps you don't understand the gravity of your situation. You're threatening a species that just eliminated an extragalactic invasion force in under 6 hours. Are you certain that's wise? You destroyed some primitive raiders. Impressive, but, hardly. Counselor, Admiral Chen interrupted, the Kethmori swarm you're calling primitive raiders had already consumed 14 civilizations in 2 galaxies. They've been active for over 50,000 years. Our xenoarchaeology teams found evidence of their work in the ruins of the precursor worlds. This statement sent shock waves through Zethkar's understanding. The precursors were legendary and advanced civilization that had vanished mysteriously eons ago, leaving behind only ruins and artifacts that modern science couldn't explain. Vexmore's confident demeanor began to crack. That's impossible. The precursors were the most advanced species in galactic history. Chen agreed. Until they encountered something they couldn't handle. The Kethmori have been feeding on civilizations since before your son was born, Counselor. The fact that we stopped them should give you pause about making threats. The counselor was clearly struggling to process this information. The political calculations that had seemed so simple moments before had become infinitely more complex. Admiral, he said carefully, perhaps we should discuss this matter in person. The Council would welcome humanity's input on these historical revelations. I'm sure they would. But, first, let me make something clear. Humanity will not abandon allies who have called for our help. We will not ignore genocide because it's politically convenient. And, we will not subordinate our moral obligations to any council, no matter how ancient or powerful they claim to be. Chin paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. However, we're not interested in conflict either. We propose a simple solution: expand the Galactic Council to include humanity and any other species that wishes to join. Create a truly representative government that serves all galactic civilizations, not just the powerful ones. Vexmore's expression was unreadable. The Council has strict admission requirements. A species must demonstrate advanced technology, stable government, and adherence to our principles of non-interference. Then, you might want to update those principles, Chen replied. Because if your definition of advancement includes watching genocide and calling it non-interference, then your entire system is morally bankrupt. Zethkar watched this exchange with growing admiration for Admiral Chen. She was standing up to the most powerful political entity in the galaxy without flinching, all while defending principles that seemed genuinely altruistic. Admiral, Vexmore said stiffly, the Council will consider your proposal. But, you must understand that there will be resistance to such changes. There always is. But, Counselor, you should also understand that humanity has a long history of resisting tyranny, no matter how well established or powerful. We didn't come to the galaxy to conquer or dominate, we came to explore and make friends. But, we won't stand by and watch good people suffer because of bad policies. After the communication ended, Zethkar sat in silence for several minutes. The implications of what he had just witnessed were enormous. Humanity hadn't just arrived on the galactic stage, they had kicked down the door and challenged the entire existing order. Admiral, he finally said, you realize that you may have just declared war on the most powerful political entity in the galaxy? Chen laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both amused and determined. Commander, my species spent most of its early history fighting impossible odds. We've learned that the size of your enemy matters less than the righteousness of your cause. But, the Council has resources, allies, thousands of ships. The Council has bureaucrats who've forgotten what they're supposed to protect, Chen interrupted. They have politicians who think stability is more important than justice. They have a military that hasn't faced a real threat in centuries. She turned back to the viewing port, where human ships continued their relief operations among the Vorthack worlds. What they don't have is something worth fighting for. When you know you're protecting your family, your friends, your way of life, that makes all the difference. Zethkar followed her gaze to his homeworld, visible as a blue-green dot in the distance. 3 weeks ago, it had been doomed. Now, his children would grow up in safety, thanks to strangers who had traveled across the galaxy to answer a desperate plea for help. Admiral, he said formally, if the Galactic Council wants a war, they'll find that the Vorthack Empire stands with humanity. Chen nodded gratefully. Thank you, Commander. But, let's hope it doesn't come to that. Sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to stand up and do the right thing. Others tend to follow. As if summoned by her words, Sethkar's communications device chimed with an incoming message. The holographic display showed the insignia of the Kepler Federation, a mid-level power in the galactic community. Admiral Chen, the message began, "This is Chancellor Morex of the Kepler Federation. We have been monitoring recent events and wish to express our admiration for humanity's actions. We formally request to join any alliance you might be forming. The galaxy needs leaders who remember that civilization means protecting the innocent." Chen smiled as more messages began arriving: the Centauri Commonwealth, the Rim Worlds Alliance, even some individual planets from Council Space itself. Word was spreading that someone had finally stood up to the Galactic Council's indifference, and many were eager to follow humanity's lead. "It appears," Admiral Chen observed, "that we're not as alone as the Council would like to believe." Sethkar watched as the list of potential allies grew longer. Perhaps the Admiral was right. Perhaps all it took was someone willing to do the right thing, regardless of the consequences. And perhaps the galaxy was ready for the kind of leadership that humanity seemed prepared to provide. But he also knew that the Galactic Council wouldn't give up their power easily. The real test would come when words turned to actions, and the established order fought back against the winds of change. When that time came, Sethkar hoped that humanity's military prowess would prove as formidable as their moral courage. 6 months had passed since humanity's confrontation with the Galactic Council, and the political landscape of the galaxy had shifted dramatically. Admiral Chen stood in the conference room of New Geneva Station, humanity's first major diplomatic outpost beyond Earth space, watching representatives from 37 different species take their seats around the massive circular table. The Alliance of Free Worlds, as it had come to be known, had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a handful of species willing to challenge the Council's authority had become a legitimate political entity representing over 200 star systems. Admiral, Commander Sethkar approached her with a datapad in hand. He had accepted the position of military liaison for the Vorthak Empire, coordinating with human forces on joint defense initiatives. "Our intelligence networks report that the Council is mobilizing what they're calling a peacekeeping force. 300 ships under the command of War Archon Thekmar." Chen studied the intelligence report with interest. Thekmar was legendary, a Crothery general who had built his reputation during the Periphery Wars, known for his tactical brilliance and absolute ruthlessness. If the Council was deploying their best military commander, they were clearly taking the alliance seriously. 300 ships, she mused. Impressive by their standards. How do our current forces compare? The Alliance fleet currently consists of 426 vessels from various member species, plus your Terran Defense Force contingent. Which numbers? Sethkar paused, still sometimes amazed by the answer to that question. 1,200 ships currently deployed, with another 800 in reserve fleets. The raw numbers were staggering, but Chen knew that numbers alone didn't determine the outcome of conflicts. The Alliance ships represented dozens of different technologies, tactical doctrines, and command structures. Creating an effective fighting force from such diversity would be challenging. Admiral Chen called out Chancellor Morex of the Kepler Federation as the formal session began. "We've received the Council's latest ultimatum. They're demanding that all Alliance members return to Council authority within 30 standard days, or face military intervention." A murmur of tension swept through the assembly. Despite their growing strength, many of the smaller species still feared the Council's response. For 3 millennia, the Council had been the ultimate authority in galactic affairs. Challenging them was unprecedented. "What are they offering in return for our submission?" asked Ambassador Veltar of the Centauri Commonwealth. "The same as before," Morex replied. "Representation without real power, laws without justice, and peace without protection for those who need it most." Chancellor Harex of the Aquilian Republic stood to address the assembly. "My fellow delegates, we must be realistic about our situation. The Galactic Council commands tremendous resources and has never lost a major conflict. Perhaps we should consider a negotiated settlement that preserves some of our autonomy while avoiding a devastating war." Several representatives nodded in agreement. Chen understood their concern. Most of these species had spent centuries avoiding major conflicts, focusing on trade and peaceful development rather than military expansion. The prospect of war with the galaxy's most powerful entity was terrifying. "With respect, Chancellor Harex," Admiral Chen said as she rose to speak, "I'd like to share some historical perspective from my species' experience. The room fell silent. Over the past months, humanity's representatives had gained a reputation for speaking uncomfortable truths that others preferred to avoid. 350 years ago, my world faced a similar choice. A powerful empire demanded our submission, offering peace in exchange for servitude. Our leaders were divided, some favored resistance, others preferred accommodation. Do you know what made the difference? She activated a holographic display showing images from Earth's history, scenes of resistance, revolution, and the hard-won victories of those who refused to surrender their freedom. We realized that there are worse things than war. Surrender to tyranny doesn't bring peace, it brings the slow death of everything that makes life worth living. Freedom, justice, the right to determine your own destiny, these aren't negotiable commodities. Ambassador Yex Cole of the Netherworlds leaned forward. But, Admiral, your species has a reputation for aggressive responses to conflict. Not all of us share humanity's willingness to fight impossible odds. Chen smiled. Ambassador, I understand your concern. But, let me ask you this, what do you think happens to species that the Council considers troublesome or non-compliant? She changed the holographic display to show a star chart of Council space. Certain systems were marked in red. These are the locations of 17 species that have gone extinct in Council space over the past 1,000 years. The official records list various causes: plague, resource depletion, internal conflicts. But, our xenoarchaeology teams have found a disturbing pattern. The display zoomed in on one of the marked systems. The Velcari Empire. 300 years ago, they challenged certain Council trade policies. Within 50 years, they had completely disappeared. Official cause: civil war. Reality: systematic economic strangulation followed by peacekeeping operations that eliminated any survivors. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Several representatives demanded to see the evidence, while others questioned humanity's sources. Admiral, Councillor Thexven of the Meridian Confederation said sharply, these are serious accusations. Do you have proof of Council involvement in these extinctions? We have data from crashed Council ships found in the ruins of extinct civilizations. We have testimony from Council defectors. And, we have the pattern itself: 17 species, all eliminated after challenging Council authority in some way. Chen changed the display again, this time showing detailed archaeological evidence, weapon signatures, ship debris, and, most damning of all, recorded communications between Council forces and the species they were supposedly helping. The Galactic Council isn't just a political entity, she continued. It's a predatory organization that eliminates potential rivals while maintaining the illusion of benevolent governance. They offer member species just enough autonomy to feel independent while slowly draining their resources and capabilities. The revelation sent shock waves through the assembly. Species that had considered the Council merely authoritarian now understood they were dealing with something far more sinister. If this is true, Chancellor Harek said slowly, then, our choice isn't between war and peace. It's between fighting now while we're strong, or dying slowly over the next few centuries. Exactly, Chen agreed. The Council has maintained power by ensuring that no single species could challenge them effectively. But, they never anticipated something like this: multiple species uniting with common purpose and shared values. War Counselor Brekthar of the Rigel Systems, a warrior species known for their military prowess, stood to address the assembly. Admiral Chen speaks truth. My people have served the Council for 8 centuries, believing we were maintaining galactic peace. But, looking at this evidence, I see that we were merely enforcers for an elaborate protection scheme. He turned to face his fellow delegates. The Rigel Systems pledge our full support to the Alliance. If the Council wants war, they'll face warriors who finally understand what they're really fighting for. One by one, other representatives stood to reaffirm their commitment to the Alliance. The mood in the room had shifted from uncertainty to grim determination. They weren't just fighting for political independence anymore, they were fighting for their very survival. Admiral, Commander Zethkar said as the formal session ended, our intelligence sources indicate that War Archon Thekmar is planning to begin his campaign within the next 2 weeks. He's targeting the Kepler Federation first, probably hoping to break our resolve by eliminating one of our founding members. Chen studied the tactical projections on her datapad. The Kepler Federation was strategically positioned along 3 major trade routes, making it an ideal target for both military and economic reasons. If the Council could capture those routes, they could cut off supply lines between Alliance members. What's the Federation's defensive capability? 43 ships, mostly light cruisers and patrol vessels. They've never maintained a large military, their strength was always in commerce, and 2 years after the first Alliance victory at Kepler, Admiral Chen stood in the observation deck of Harmony Station, the newest and largest diplomatic facility in known space. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see ships from over 60 different species docked at the massive station, their crews working together on projects that would have been unimaginable under the old Council system. The transformation had been neither quick nor easy. The galaxy had endured 18 months of what historians were already calling the transition wars, conflicts between Alliance forces, Council loyalists, separatist movements, and various opportunistic factions. But, from the chaos, something remarkable was emerging. Admiral, Commander Zethkar approached with the latest status reports, his bearing showing the confidence that had replaced his initial uncertainty about humanity's revolutionary approach. The final Council stronghold has agreed to join the ceasefire negotiations. Councillor Vexmore himself is requesting safe passage to the peace talks. Chen accepted the datapad with satisfaction. Vexmore's participation would be crucial. He remained the most influential hardliner among Council leadership, and his endorsement of any agreement would carry significant weight with remaining loyalist factions. What changed his mind? The prosperity reports, Zethkar replied with something that might have been amusement. When the data showed that Alliance territories were experiencing 30% higher economic growth and 40% better quality of life indicators than Council space, even he couldn't ignore the numbers. The prosperity reports had been Chen's idea, detailed economic and social analyses comparing life under different governmental systems. The results had been striking enough to convince even skeptical populations that the Alliance approach was producing tangible benefits. Any word from the Terrasian systems? Interesting developments there as well. The pure sovereignty movement is fracturing. About 40% of their population is requesting readmission to galactic civilization, though they want guarantees about maintaining their cultural autonomy. Chen nodded thoughtfully. The isolationist experiment had lasted exactly 14 months before resource shortages and technological stagnation convinced most participants that complete separation from galactic civilization was impractical. But their concerns about cultural preservation were legitimate and needed to be addressed. Admiral Chen, a new voice called from across the observation deck. She turned to see Dr. Marcus Webb, humanity's leading xenosociologist and the architect of the Alliance's cultural integration protocols. Dr. Webb, how are the preparations for tomorrow's ceremony? Remarkably smooth, considering we're attempting something that has never been tried before in galactic history, Webb replied with the wry humor that had helped him navigate the complex negotiations of the past 2 years. 63 species agreeing to a common charter of rights and responsibilities, while maintaining complete sovereignty over their internal affairs. Tomorrow's ceremony would mark the formal establishment of the Galactic Confederation, not a government in the traditional sense, but a voluntary association of free peoples committed to mutual aid, peaceful cooperation, and shared prosperity. The charter had taken months of careful negotiation to craft, balancing collective security needs with individual autonomy. Any last-minute complications? The usual concerns about enforcement mechanisms and dispute resolution. Some species worry that without coercive authority, the agreements will be meaningless. Others fear that any enforcement mechanism could evolve into the same oppressive system we're trying to replace. Chen understood the dilemma. How do you create effective governance without creating the potential for tyranny? The solution they had developed was elegant in its simplicity, a system based on consensus, transparency, and the principle that any member could withdraw from the Confederation at any time. Dr. Webb, she said, in your professional opinion, will it work? The xenosociologist considered the question seriously. Admiral, every previous attempt at galactic government has been based on the assumption that advanced civilizations naturally tend toward domination and hierarchy. The Council system worked because it formalized those tendencies into stable institutions. He gestured toward the window, where ships from dozens of species worked together in perfect coordination. But what we're seeing here suggests that cooperation might be equally natural, given the right conditions. If we can maintain those conditions, then, yes, I believe it will work better than anything that's come before. Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the station's communication system. Admiral Chen, please report to Docking Bay 7. Priority arrival incoming. Chen made her way through the bustling corridors of Harmony Station, noting the casual interactions between species that had been enemies or strangers just 2 years ago. Vorthack engineers collaborated with human scientists on starship designs. Centauri traders negotiated with Rigel merchants in markets that operated on principles of fair exchange rather than exploitation. At Docking Bay 7, she found an unexpected sight. A small courier vessel bearing the insignia of the former Galactic Council had just docked, but the being emerging from it was not Councillor Vexmore or any other political figure. Instead, a young Eltarian in simple robes approached her with nervous dignity. "Admiral Chen, I am Scholar Lex Miron of the Eltarian Archive. I come bearing gifts from the remnants of the Council's bureaucracy." "Gifts?" The young scholar activated a portable holographic projector, displaying images of vast data repositories. For 3,000 years, the Council accumulated knowledge from every civilization in their sphere of influence. Scientific discoveries, cultural records, historical archives, the greatest collection of information in galactic history. Shen stared at the display in amazement. The scope of the collection was staggering: millions of years of accumulated knowledge from hundreds of civilizations. "Scholar, this is incredible. But why are you bringing it to us?" Lex Miron's expression showed a mixture of hope and determination. "Because the Council's leadership intended to destroy it rather than see it fall into Alliance hands. They believed that controlling information was essential to maintaining power." "And you disagreed?" "I believe that knowledge belongs to everyone, Admiral. Under the old system, most of this information was classified or restricted to Council elites. But if the Confederation is truly committed to cooperation and shared prosperity, then this knowledge should be freely available to all member species." Chen felt a surge of excitement as she realized the implications. The archive contained not just historical records, but advanced scientific and technological information that could accelerate development across the galaxy by centuries. "Scholar, are you asking us to guarantee that this information will be shared freely?" "I'm asking you to prove that your principles are genuine." The Council talked about serving galactic civilization while hoarding power and knowledge for themselves. If the Confederation is different, then let your actions demonstrate it. Shen didn't hesitate. "Scholar Lex Miron, I formally accept this gift on behalf of all Confederation members. We commit to making this archive freely accessible to any civilization that wishes to use it, whether they're Confederation members or not." The young Eltarian's relief was palpable. "Thank you, Admiral. Perhaps now the galaxy can finally begin to heal from 3 millennia of artificial scarcity." The next morning, Harmony Station's main assembly hall filled with representatives from across the galaxy. Not just Confederation members, but observers from neutral systems, former Council territories, and even a few Council loyalists curious about the new order being established. Admiral Chen stood at the podium, looking out at the most diverse gathering in galactic history. In the front row sat Commander Zethkar, representing the Vorthak Empire that had started this journey with a desperate plea for help. Beside him sat Chancellor Morax, War Councillor Brekthar, and dozens of other leaders who had risked everything to build something better. "Friends," she began, 2 years ago, most of us were strangers. We came from different worlds, different cultures, different ways of understanding the universe. What brought us together was not conquest or political calculation, but something much simpler: the recognition that we share common values and common hopes." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "Today, we're not creating a government or an empire. We're formalizing a commitment to treat each other with respect, to help each other in times of need, and to work together toward goals that none of us could achieve alone." The ceremony proceeded smoothly, with each species representative signing the Confederation Charter and pledging their commitment to its principles. But the real moment of triumph came when an unexpected figure appeared in the hall's entrance. Councillor Vexmore, the Eltarian who had once threatened humanity with the full might of the Galactic Council, walked slowly down the central aisle. His appearance had changed dramatically. Gone were the elaborate robes and symbols of office, replaced by simple civilian clothing. But his dignity remained intact as he approached the podium. "Admiral Chen," he said formally, "I request permission to address this assembly." Chen stepped aside, curious about what the former council leader might say. Vexmore faced the gathered representatives with visible emotion. "For 40 years, I served the Galactic Council believing that we were maintaining peace and order in a chaotic universe. I defended policies that I now understand were based on fear, control, and the assumption that different species could never truly cooperate as equals." He paused, his voice becoming stronger as he continued. "I was wrong. What I see here today proves that cooperation is not only possible but natural when people are free to choose their own path. The Altarian Republic formally requests membership in the Galactic Confederation. The applause was thunderous, but Chen noticed that it came not from triumph over a defeated enemy, but from genuine joy at welcoming a former adversary into the community of free peoples. As the ceremony concluded and the formal celebration began, Chen found herself back at the observation deck, watching the ships that now represented a galaxy transformed. Commander Zethkar joined her, as had become his habit during quiet moments. "Admiral," he said thoughtfully, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if your people had ignored our distress call?" Chen considered the question. "Sometimes. But I think someone would have eventually challenged the old system. The galaxy was ready for change, we just happened to be the catalyst." "Perhaps. But it took a species willing to risk everything for strangers to show the rest of us what was possible." They stood in comfortable silence, watching as ships from across the galaxy worked together to build a future that none of them could have imagined just 2 years ago. The transformation wasn't complete, it would take generations to fully heal the wounds left by millennia of oppression. But the foundation had been laid for something unprecedented in galactic history, a civilization based on freedom, cooperation, and the radical idea that different species could work together as equals. "Commander," Chen said finally, "there's something I want to tell you. When we first received your distress call, many of our leaders questioned whether we should get involved. They worried about the risks, the costs, the unknown consequences of intervention. What changed their minds? A simple truth that my species learned long ago: when someone calls for help, you answer. That's what decent people do." As if summoned by her words, Chen's communication device chimed with an incoming message. The display showed coordinates from a distant sector, far beyond current Confederation space, and a familiar pattern: a desperate transmission requesting aid from an unknown species facing extinction. Chen smiled as she recognized the pattern. Somewhere in the galaxy, people were calling for help. And now, instead of just one species capable of responding, there were 63 civilizations committed to the principle that no one should face extinction alone. The age of isolation was ending. The age of cooperation had begun. And, for the first time in galactic history, the call for help would not go unanswered. The news of Thekmar's defeat spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Within 2 weeks of the Battle of Kepler, 17 more systems had formally requested membership in the Alliance of Free Worlds. But, with this rapid expansion came new challenges that Admiral Chen hadn't anticipated. She sat in her office aboard New Geneva Station, reviewing reports from Alliance territories with growing concern. The data painted a troubling picture: supply shortages, communication breakdowns, and, most worrying of all, the emergence of extremist factions within their own ranks. "Admiral," Commander Zethkar entered with a priority message cylinder, his usual composed demeanor showing signs of strain. "We've received word from the Outer Rim territories. 3 systems have declared independence from both the Council and the Alliance. They're calling themselves the Pure Sovereignty Movement." Chen accepted the message and scanned its contents. The manifesto made for disturbing reading. The Pure Sovereignty Movement claimed that any form of interstellar government was inherently oppressive, that true freedom required complete isolation from galactic affairs. "They're also demanding that all non-native species leave their territories," Zethkar continued. "This includes Alliance military personnel, trade representatives, and civilian refugees from former Council space." This was exactly what Chen had feared. The Alliance's rapid growth had attracted not just species seeking freedom and justice, but also those with more radical agendas. The collapse of Council authority had created a power vacuum that various factions were eager to fill. What's the humanitarian situation in those systems? Bad and getting worse. The sovereignty movement is dominated by the Terrasian species, who make up about 60% of the population in those systems. But there are significant minorities: Vorthak colonists, human research stations, and about 3 million refugees from the recent conflicts. Chen studied the star charts showing the affected regions. The 3 systems in question controlled important mining operations that supplied rare minerals essential for starship construction. If the Alliance lost access to those resources, it would severely impact their ability to maintain their growing fleet. "Admiral," Zethkar said carefully, "there's another complication. The Taraxians are requesting military support from the Galactic Council. They're claiming that the Alliance represents a greater threat to their sovereignty than the Council ever did." This was the nightmare scenario Chen had hoped to avoid. The Alliance's success was creating backlash that could drive some species back into Council control. Worse yet, it provided the Council with an opportunity to present themselves as protectors of smaller species against human imperialism. Get me a secure channel to the other Alliance leaders. We need an emergency council session. 6 hours later, the holographic images of Alliance representatives from across the galaxy filled Shen's conference room. The mood was tense as reports came in from various flashpoints where the rapid political changes were causing instability. The situation is deteriorating faster than we anticipated, reported Chancellor Morex of the Kepler Federation. We're receiving requests for intervention from 15 different systems, but our resources are already stretched thin. Ambassador Veltar of the Centauri Commonwealth looked exhausted. My people are questioning whether we move too quickly. The collapse of established order is causing more suffering than many expected. Some of our member worlds are considering returning to Council protection. War Counselor Brekthar of the Rigel systems pounded his fist on the table. We cannot show weakness now. Every species that returns to the Council emboldens our enemies and discourages potential allies. Counselor, Admiral Chen said quietly, forcing species to remain in the Alliance against their will makes us no better than the Council we replaced. Then, what do you propose, Admiral? That we simply allow our coalition to collapse? Chen activated a holographic display showing her analysis of the current situation. We need to understand what we're really facing here. This isn't just political opposition, it's the natural consequence of dismantling a 3,000-year-old system of government without having a complete replacement ready. She highlighted various regions on the galactic map. Look at the pattern. The systems experiencing the most instability are those where Council authority was strongest, where local governments had atrophied under centralized control. When we removed that control, we created a vacuum. Chancellor Harrix of the Aquilian Republic nodded thoughtfully. You're suggesting that our liberation created more problems than it solved. In the short term, yes. But, Admiral, Ambassador Yex Cole of the Nether Worlds interjected, we can't simply restore the old system. The evidence of Council atrocities is undeniable. I agree completely, Chen replied. We can't go back, but we can learn from our mistakes and adapt our approach going forward. She changed the display to show her proposed solution. We've been thinking like revolutionaries when we need to think like builders. Instead of just opposing the Council, we need to offer something better not just to our allies, but to every species in the galaxy. The plan Chen outlined was ambitious beyond anything the Alliance had previously attempted. Rather than simply expanding their military and political control, she proposed a 3-phase reconstruction program that would address the root causes of galactic instability. Phase 1 involved humanitarian assistance to war-torn regions, regardless of their political affiliation. Alliance fleets would provide medical aid, food supplies, and technical assistance to any system that requested help, with no strings attached. Phase 2 focused on economic development. The Alliance would establish trade networks that bypassed the Council's monopolistic practices, offering fair market prices and technology transfers to developing worlds. Phase 3 was the most revolutionary, the creation of a new form of galactic government based on voluntary cooperation rather than centralized authority. Each member system would retain complete internal autonomy while contributing to collective defense and common projects. Admiral, War Counselor Brekthar said skeptically, this sounds idealistic to the point of impossibility. How do you prevent free riders who take benefits without contributing? How do you maintain military coordination without unified command structure? The same way humanity learned to manage global cooperation on Earth, Chen replied. Through shared values, mutual benefit, and the understanding that our individual success depends on collective prosperity. She showed examples from human history, international humanitarian organizations, cooperative research projects, and mutual defense treaties that had evolved into lasting institutions. It won't be easy, and it won't be fast. But the alternative is either eternal war or the gradual recreation of the same oppressive system we fought to eliminate. Chancellor Morex looked intrigued. Admiral, assuming we could implement such a system, what happens to species that choose not to participate? Do we simply ignore Council loyalists or the pure sovereignty movement? We demonstrate that our way works better, Chen replied simply. When Council loyalists see their neighbors prospering under Alliance cooperation while they struggle under authoritarian control, many will reconsider their allegiances. When isolationists realize that cutting themselves off from galactic civilization limits their opportunities, some will choose to rejoin the community. And those who don't? Then, we respect their choice and protect their right to make it. True freedom includes the freedom to be wrong. The debate continued for hours, with representatives raising practical concerns about implementation, resource allocation, and the inevitable resistance from entrenched interests. But, gradually, a consensus emerged that Chen's approach offered the best hope for long-term stability. Admiral, Ambassador Veltar said as the session neared its end, your proposal requires a level of trust and cooperation that most galactic civilizations have never experienced. Are you certain it's achievable? Chen smiled, thinking of the desperate distress call that had brought humanity into galactic affairs in the first place. Ambassador, 6 months ago, most of you had never heard of humanity. Today, we're working together as equals to reshape the political structure of the entire galaxy. If that's possible, then almost anything is. As the conference ended and the holographic images faded, Chen found herself alone with Commander Zethkar. The Vorthack officer had been quietly observing the discussions, his expression thoughtful. Admiral, he said finally, do you really believe that voluntary cooperation can replace the coercive authority that has maintained galactic order for millennia? Commander, I believe that coercive authority never really maintained order, it just suppressed the symptoms of underlying problems. True order comes from people working together because they want to, not because they have to. Zethkar was quiet for a moment, processing this perspective. My people have legends about a time before the Council, when different species cooperated freely without central authority. Most scholars dismissed these as myths. Maybe they weren't myths. Maybe they were memories of what's possible when civilizations choose cooperation over domination. As if to test this theory, Chen's communications system chimed with an incoming message. The holographic display showed the insignia of the Galactic Council, but the speaker was not Counselor Vexmore or War Archon Thekmar. Admiral Chen, this is Counselor Yethera of the Research Consortium. I am speaking on behalf of a growing faction within the Council that believes our current policies are unsustainable. We would like to discuss the possibility of accommodation with the Alliance. Chen exchanged glances with Commander Zethkar. The Council was beginning to fracture, with moderate voices seeking alternatives to the hardline approach that had failed at Kepler. Counselor Yethera, Chen replied, the Alliance is always willing to discuss peaceful solutions to galactic conflicts. What did you have in mind? A formal ceasefire and the establishment of neutral zones where refugees from the conflicts can seek assistance. Perhaps it's time for both our organizations to acknowledge that the old ways are no longer working. The conversation that followed revealed the depth of the crisis within Council space. Yethera spoke of widespread civil unrest, economic collapse in systems that had depended on exploitative trade relationships, and the emergence of dozens of splinter factions claiming legitimate authority. Admiral, the Counselor continued, we estimate that within 6 months, the Council will fragment entirely unless we can find a peaceful transition to whatever comes next. What are you proposing specifically? Joint humanitarian missions to the most affected systems. Shared resources to prevent complete societal collapse. And, perhaps most importantly, a forum for discussing the creation of new governmental structures that can serve all galactic civilizations. Chen felt a surge of hope mixed with apprehension. This was the opportunity they had been working toward, but it came with enormous risks. Any cooperation with Council moderates would be seen by some Alliance members as betraying the revolution they had fought to achieve. Counselor, I'll need to discuss this with the other Alliance leaders. But, speaking personally, I believe we have an obligation to help prevent unnecessary suffering, regardless of past conflicts. Thank you, Admiral. I hope we can find a way forward that honors the legitimate grievances that led to this crisis while avoiding the complete destruction of galactic civilization. After the communication ended, Chen sat in silence for several minutes, considering the implications of what she had just heard. The success of the Alliance had created exactly the kind of instability she had hoped to avoid. Commander, she said finally, what would your people think if we offered humanitarian aid to Council territories? Zethkar considered the question carefully. There would be resistance from some quarters. Many Vorthack still remember the Council's indifference to our suffering. But, my people also understand the difference between justice and revenge. And the other Alliance members? Mixed reactions, I would guess. The species that suffered most under Council rule will be skeptical. But, the more pragmatic leaders will recognize that a complete collapse of Council space would create refugee crises and security threats that would affect everyone. Chen nodded, already beginning to formulate the arguments she would need to make to convince the Alliance leadership. The next few months would test whether their coalition could evolve from a revolutionary movement into a mature political entity capable of managing complex regional stability. Over the following weeks, Chen found herself engaged in the most delicate negotiations of her career. Alliance hardliners accused her of surrendering to their enemies. Council loyalists claimed she was trying to destroy their civilization from within. And various splinter factions denounced any cooperation as betrayal of their particular interests. But, gradually, a consensus began to emerge around what became known as the Reconstruction Protocols. Joint Alliance Council task forces would provide emergency assistance to systems affected by the ongoing conflicts. Neutral zones would be established where refugees could receive aid regardless of their political affiliation. And, most importantly, a series of regional conferences would begin the process of designing new governmental structures for the post-Council galaxy. The first test of this cooperation came when the Helix Nebula colonies declared independence and immediately faced invasion by the remnants of War Archon Thekmar's fleet. The war criminal had gone rogue after his defeat at Kepler, gathering other hardliners who refused to accept the changing galactic order. Admiral Commander Zethkar reported, intelligence suggests that Thekmar has assembled nearly 200 ships, mostly raiders and mercenaries. He's demanding tribute from independent systems and threatening to destroy any colonies that cooperate with either the Alliance or the Reformed Council. Chen studied the tactical situation with growing anger. Thekmar was exactly the kind of opportunistic predator that thrived in power vacuums. His fleet was too small to threaten major systems, but more than capable of terrorizing isolated colonies and trade routes. What are our options? The Alliance fleet could eliminate his forces within weeks, but the Helix colonies are technically neutral territory. Some of our members argue that we have no authority to intervene. This was the fundamental challenge of their new approach to galactic governance. The old council would have simply declared Thekmar a threat to stability and destroyed his fleet without consultation. But the Alliance's commitment to respecting sovereignty made such unilateral action problematic. What does Councillor Yethera propose? Joint intervention under the Reconstruction Protocols. Council legitimacy combined with Alliance military capability. But she needs formal authorization from both our organizations. Chen realized that this crisis would serve as a crucial test of whether the emerging cooperation between former enemies could survive contact with real-world problems. If they could successfully coordinate a joint military operation, it would demonstrate that peaceful coexistence was possible. If they failed, it might drive both sides back toward confrontation. Schedule an emergency session with Alliance leadership. And tell Councillor Yethera that we're prepared to move forward if we can get the necessary approvals. The debate within Alliance councils was fierce but ultimately decisive. Even the most skeptical members recognized that allowing rogue warlords to prey on innocent civilians would undermine everything they claimed to represent. The formal vote authorized joint operations under strict conditions: humanitarian protection only, no territorial occupation, and immediate withdrawal once the threat was eliminated. 3 days later, the largest joint fleet in galactic history assembled at the edge of the Helix Nebula. Alliance ships flying alongside Reformed Council vessels, their crews working together despite centuries of mistrust and recent warfare. Admiral War Councillor Brekthar reported from his flagship, joint operations are proceeding smoothly. Our communications protocols are functioning, target identification is coordinated, and there have been no significant incidents between former enemies. Chen watched the tactical display with satisfaction as the combined fleet moved toward Thekmar's stronghold. The rogue War Archon had fortified himself in an abandoned mining complex, believing that his enemies would never cooperate effectively enough to threaten him. He was wrong. The battle itself was anticlimactic. Faced with overwhelming odds and perfect coordination between Alliance and Council forces, most of Thekmar's mercenaries surrendered immediately. The War Archon himself was captured alive, along with evidence of atrocities committed against civilian populations. Admiral Chen, Councillor Yethera called from her command ship, "This operation has exceeded all expectations. Our crews are working together as if they had trained together for years. It's amazing what people can accomplish when they're fighting for the same principles," Chen replied. The question now is whether we can build on this success. The answer came over the following months as more joint operations were authorized to deal with various crisis situations. Pirate fleets that had emerged during the chaos were eliminated through coordinated enforcement actions. Refugee camps were established and supplied through shared resources. And, perhaps most importantly, the regional conferences began to produce concrete proposals for new forms of governance. Admiral, Commander Zethkar announced during one of their regular briefings, I have news that you need to hear. The pure sovereignty movement has collapsed. Chen looked up from the reports she had been reviewing. Completely? The Terrasian government has formally requested readmission to galactic civilization. Apparently, their isolation experiment produced economic collapse, technological stagnation, and widespread civil unrest. They're offering to rejoin under any terms that guarantee their cultural autonomy. This was the final piece of evidence Chen needed to demonstrate that the alliance approach was working. Even the most radical separatist movement had discovered that cooperation was more beneficial than isolation. What about their demands regarding non-native populations? Withdrawn completely. They're asking for assistance in integrating their society with the broader galactic community. As Chen reflected on the events of the past year, she realized that they had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. Not just military victory over an oppressive system, but the creation of sustainable alternatives that attracted voluntary participation rather than requiring coercion. The revolution that had begun with humanity's response to a distress call had evolved into something far more significant, a complete transformation in how galactic civilizations related to each other. The age of empire was ending, replaced by an age of cooperation that offered hope for lasting peace and prosperity. But Chen also knew that this was just the beginning. The real work of building lasting institutions would take generations. The challenge now was to ensure that the principles that had guided their success would survive the inevitable pressures of governance and power. The galaxy had changed forever. The question was whether that change would endure.